Episode number 52 of Making a Case. Can morality and governance coexist? Let's get it. Hey, what's going on? YouTube, it's your boy, Dr. Jacob Ice. I'm an educator, author, speaker, entrepreneur, content creator, father, a little bit of everything. Hey, we back with another episode of Making a Case, man. Episode number 52. As we head closer to the New Year's, this will not be our last episode. We're gonna squeeze in one more episode for you before we head into 2025. And we'll probably talk about what we got planned for the new year. And I'm excited about the new year. Big things will be popping, of course. But we'll leave that for the next episode. But for episode number 52, can morality and governance exist? Before we get started, of course, we gotta go over our two channel norms. One, we'll take points and not people, and two, we don't do all the cussing and derogatory stuff. We like to keep it professional over here. All right. So let's get into my opening statement. So the funny thing is, when I tell you I was literally watching a video, because I'm a nerd. I'm a self-proclaimed nerd. Now, I wouldn't admit that years ago, but now that being a nerd is in, I admit it to you. All right. I was literally watching a video and this topic literally came up, and I had no idea that it was gonna come up in the video. It probably was in the algorithm, to be honest with you, as I was doing research for this. So I'm not surprised. But when it comes to governing a state, governing a country, just governing in general, right? The question always should be asked when it comes to laws being made and when the decisions are being made for a large scale of people, because of course that's what we're talking about when it comes to governing. Um, is reality or is morality a thing that we should consider? Now, the case that I'm going to make is yes and no. Okay, sounds odd, right? Because morality always should be in any and everything that you do. But at the end of the day, we also got to understand that morality is very subjective. Okay, morality is not an objective thing. So when we're looking at making decisions for the whole, some people are going to think that it's very moral, and some people are going to think that it's not. So that's why I say yes and no. But in general, can morality and governance coexist? Um, yes and no, right? Because a lot of people like to attach morality to religion when it actually is separate, right? Morality has something to do with, well, how we go about living our lives that is thinking about other people. Okay, that we're not selfish in our decision making, that we're making sure that decisions that are being made takes others into consideration, because we're living in a world with other people and we can't just think about ourselves. That is the most simplified definition of morality that I can give you. All right. And sometimes when governing, um, decisions are made that can sometimes be self-centered, sometimes can be very biased, and sometimes be very selfish. All right. So can they coexist? Yes and no. But the pieces of evidence I got for you today will be making more specific cases, and we'll see whether or not we agree with the points that are being made. Technically, I got four pieces of evidence. It seems like that's becoming very, um, let's say, new to our channel with four pieces of evidence. Typically, I'm used to doing three, But when I'm finding good information, like I gotta present it to you. So we're gonna get into our pieces of evidence without further ado. Let's get into it. All right. So for my first piece of evidence, can morality and governance coexist? I have a paper. I believe it's more like an article, to be honest with you. For you, that's titled "The Rise of Government and the Decline of Morality" by James A. Dorn. Okay. Um, I think it makes some really good points. Of course, their point is the fact that as government has started to ascend it, morality descends. Okay, so let's get into it. And we're gonna scroll down because I want to get to the good stuff. I want to get to the good stuff. All right, here we go. The growth of government has politicized life and weakened the nation's moral fabric. Government intervention in the economy and the community and society has increased the payoff from political action and reduced the scope of private action. People have become more dependent on the state and have sacrificed freedom for a false sense of security. I wouldn't disagree with that, particularly when we talk about the welfare state, right? As people take money from the government, well, they're more dependent on the government, and they're more dependent on the government to step in when it comes to the mistakes that people make in general. So I don't disagree there. The most obvious signs of moral decay in America are the prevalence of out of wedlock birth, the breakup of families, the immorality of public education, and the eruption of criminal activity. But there are other signs as well: the decline in civility, the lack of integrity in both public and private life, and the growth of litigation as the chief way to settle disputes. I think that is a good point, right? As people, a lot of times we go straight to the government uh, or the court system when somebody owes us money. We got to go to the court. When it comes to child support or the breakup of families, we got to go to the court. So we depend a lot on the government. One cannot blame government for all of society ills, but there is no doubt that economic and social legislation over the past 50 years have had a negative impact on virtue. Individuals lose their moral bearing when they become dependent on welfare, when they are rewarded for having children out of wedlock, and when they are not held accountable for their actions. I totally agree. The internal moral compass that normally guides individual behavior will no longer function when the state undermines incentives for moral conduct and blurs the distinction between right and wrong. More government spending is not the answer to our social, economic, or cultural problems. The task is not to reinvent government or to give politics meaning. The task is to limit government and revitalize civil society. Government meddling will only make matters worse. If we want to help the disadvantaged, we do not do so by making poverty pay, by restricting market, by prohibiting school choice, by discouraging thrift, or by sending the message that the principal function of government is to take care of us. Rather, we do so by eliminating social engineering and welfare, by cultivating free markets, and by returning to our moral heritage. Let's see. This might be something I want to read. So far, it makes sense to me, right? I do agree that we're dependent too much on government. All right. Less government is best. But unfortunately, a lot of times that when we can't civilly handle situations between people, then we need kind of like this father figure to step in and be the mediator, so to speak. So at the turn of the century, there was no welfare state. Family and social bonds were strong, and civil society flourished in numerous fraternal and religious organizations. Total government spending was less than 10% of the GNP, and the federal government power were narrowly limited. Immigrants was faced with material poverty, true, but they were not rich. There was a certain moral order in everyday life, which began in the home and spread to the outside community. Baltimore's Polish immigrants provide a good example. Like other immigrants, they arrived with virtually nothing except the desire to work hard to live in a free country. The ethos of liberty and responsibility is evident in a 1907 housing report describing the Polish community in Fells Point. I won't read that, but let's see. I definitely want to get to this, though. Today, after more than 50 years of the welfare state, and after spending $5 trillion on anti-poverty programs since the mid 1960s, Baltimore and other American cities are struggling for survival. Self-reliance has given way to dependence and the loss of respect for person and problem, which I always thought the war on drugs and the war on poverty was just such, it's disrespectful if we're really being honest. Okay. Because we understand why poverty happens and where drugs come from. We understand that poverty is not going anywhere and drugs is not going anywhere. Okay. As a result of capitalism, which we talked about in a couple of episodes ago, right? We understand that poverty will exist. All right. So there's no need to even pretend like this is not the case. Uh, the inner city landscape is cluttered with crime infested public housing and public schools that are mostly dreadful, dangerous, and amoral, where one learns more about survival than virtue. And the way to survive is not to take responsibility for one's own life and family, but to vote for politicians who have the power to keep the welfare checks rolling. Dysfunctional behavior now seems almost normal as people are shot daily, and the vast majority of inner city births are to unwed mothers receiving aid to families with dependent children. In addition to the moral decay, high tax rates and regulatory overkill have driven businesses and taxpayers out of the city and slowed economic development. It's not a pretty picture. In sum, the growth of government and the rise of the transfer society have undermined the work ethic and substituted an ethos of dependence for an ethos of liberty and responsibility. Virtue and civil society have suffered in the process, as has economic welfare. Now, I would not say that the government is totally responsible for the inner cities, and we know they play a role, right? But I believe that capitalism, I believe that the surge of new technology, I believe that inflation, all these things, it's multi-layered and it's multi-factor. All these things play a factor in creating a mentality and a mindset where people either A, depend on the government, or B, they're focused on the American dream that they could potentially one day reach a certain level where they can be calling shots, they can have power. Okay. So it's the idea of a dream in America. All right. So the reason that draws like the pull factor, right? That draws a lot of immigrants to this country is the idea of freedom. Is the idea that I could come over here and I could gain reputation and prestige and make something of myself. So that's also a factor. The government plays its role, but it's the American ideas that also play a role as well. So I don't want us to forget that. Let's see if it's anything else that I want to touch on in this because, of course, I don't want to. And that might be, yeah, that's all I really want to touch on with that. I thought it was they had some very well thought out points, um, which they do seem to put a lot of responsibility on government. Like I said, the government is responsible for the welfare state, right? The government does help create dependency amongst the poor individuals in our country, right? Because there are not a lot of regulation and not a lot of stipulations and guidelines when it comes to taking money from the government because people could do as they will. So yes, the government plays its part, but we have to understand with the evolving times, with the government evolving the way it has, with our economy evolving the way it has, that it has created this state, right? It has created this mentality that now, yes, we suffering from. So, um, so can morality and governance coexist? Um, it's a matter of looking at it from really a cultural lens and a cultural standpoint. It depends on the culture, right? Because the Jewish culture is probably doing just fine. Um, I would even say maybe even like the Asian community, Irish, like those subcultures here in America that function pretty independent from the larger culture, I feel like they're doing pretty fine. It's probably your black culture, even to a certain extent, your white culture that kind of having some issues. All right. Or I should say it's probably more class based, right? Your middle class and poor class people are having more issues than, of course, your higher class. All right. So that was my first piece of evidence. Can morality and governance coexist? Let's get into our second piece of evidence. All right. So for my second piece of evidence, we're gonna kind of address something a little bit differently. We're still talking about morality and governance, morality and politics, but this article is going to kind of come at it from a different angle. So this is from the Massachusetts Daily Collegian, just called Morality and Politics by, hold on, let me get the author name. Mike Torino. Hopefully I'm pronouncing your name right. I want to make sure I always give credit. All right. So let's get into it. It says you do not have a right to enforce your morality on other people. This is a statement often heard in conversation about any political issue that can be phrased in moral terms. One side will say that something is immoral, and the other side will claim that it doesn't matter and that the government should not be in the business of enforcing morality. I was kind of addressing that earlier. While one side gonna think something immoral, and the other side is gonna think that it's moral. Once again, it's subjective, right? So you're gonna always have a situation. That's why I don't tend to worry about. I was about to sound real insensitive what I'm about to say. I don't necessarily worry about how people feel about what I'm saying because I understand no matter what I say, some people are going to take offense to it, whether it's truth, whether it's backed on research or data, it doesn't matter, right? Because what we understand about people is people's feelings are always going to be involved. All right. So your feelings don't care nothing about data and facts. All right. So some are more rational than others. Some are more emotional than others. So I think that's kind of the point that they're trying to get at. Being on the left myself, I have seen this kind of argument employed many times against conservatives. I've also seen it used by libertarians against progressives. But one way or another, no matter who brings it up, it is a bad argument and use a hypocritical one. We all need to stop using it. The idea that government should be morally neutral is an old one. It holds that society can be compared with a complex game in which different people have different goals and follow different values, and the role of the state is to enforce the rules of the game. So the government should be like a referee in the game of football. It should not take sides or support any one player's goals and value, but merely ensure that everyone follows the rule, which is ideal, right? It sounds good, but in reality, it's not realistic because people are always going to take sides. All right. Just I want to say the last video we talked about in journalism or in the media, can they be objective? Right? Yes, it was my last video. So this is kind of speaking on the same thing. Like, how can you not choose sides when you are in politics and governance? Like, you literally are going to take a political stance on something that involves morality. I mean, it would be hard not to. So, the problem with that vision is that the rules themselves are not morally neutral. So the state is not actually taking a neutral stand when it enforces them. Every government rule, every law is based on some concept of right and wrong. Therefore, every law is based on a certain view of morality. And that's a great point. Okay. Like, in order for that law to be introduced to the American public, somebody had to create the bill, but somebody had to create the idea that, you know what, I think this would be right by the American people. Or it might not be by American people in general, just by the base that follows them, right? But it still has a, a context behind, well, I think this is going to be good for the people, and I think this is right. Okay. Um, we have laws against murder and rape because we believe that murder and rape are immoral. We have law protecting free speech because we believe free speech is good, which is to say moral. We have laws that guarantee free public school for children and Medicare and Social Security for the elderly because we believe these things to be good and moral, because we believe that at least some people have a right to education, healthcare, and a decent income, even if we can't agree that all people do. Um, that's debatable, right? I don't think people necessarily agree that all people should have them. I just believe that they feel like because most people in this country are religious, that if they didn't, then they would be hypocritical and they would be seen in the eyes of God of not doing God's work. So I really think it has more to do with them being judged by the creator. Now, that's just my opinion. All right. Um, Even laws that don't have obvious moral implications, like speed limits on the highway, use meant to protect people from some danger. So they are still based on a moral vision, the idea that government has a moral duty to protect people from certain dangers. And what happens when you don't agree with the government idea of morality? What happens if you go above the speed limit because you don't think you need protection from danger? Or if you refuse to pay taxes because you don't want your money spent to help other people? Or if you stab someone who slept with your wife? Or is it because you think you have a right to revenge? I'm laughing because like that came out of nowhere. But to be honest with you, out of all those examples that they use, people will feel like that last one they would be in the right to do. I'm just saying. The government comes in and punishes you in some way. This is how society works, not just our society, but any society that has ever existed or could ever exist. There are certain rules, and if you break them, you get punished. Different society had different rules, but they all uphold their own specific rule for moral reasons. This is why it makes no sense to argue that the government should not be enforcing morality. Enforcing morality is what the government does every time any person is arrested or fined for anything. Now we can disagree about what particular moral rules are ones that the government should enforce. In fact, every time a person says you should not enforce your morality on other people, what they really mean is your moral rules are wrong and you should not be enforced, but my moral rules are correct. So they are the ones that should be enforced. And well, I kind of disagree with that because it said enforcing morality is what the government does every time a person arrested and fined. No, they are enforcing a law that was created by the government to uphold authority, right? To maintain order. I think that's the main thing. I don't think it's more of a morale thing. I think it's in order to maintain order. So, um, let's see. In reality, there can be no such thing as government that does not enforce some vision of morality, someone's idea of right and wrong. To complain that you do not want morality enforced on you is hypocritical because assuming you want to live in a society, you all wish to enforce some kind of moral rules on other people. Debate should never be framed in terms of whether or not we should enforce morality, or rather the proper way to frame it is to ask which particular moral rules are correct and should therefore be enforced. Now, I do agree with that some our ideas of right and wrong will always be in the picture, right? So we can never not look at laws or anything that goes on for the benefit of society as a situation where it's amoral. It, that just not going to exist. But there will always be constant debate because, as I said, that it's a subjective thing, right? And we know that people are going to bring their religious stance when it comes to morality, and then other people are just going to be like, it's about what's the right for the whole. What good for the goose is good for the gander type of situation. So there are always going to be different lenses, different angles that people come at it. And that's why we always have these huge and major debates when it comes to politics or anything else, because so many things are subjective. So, but no, you can't get away from morality being in politics. But my question is, can they actually coexist? All right. So we're going to keep on asking that question. We're going to move on to our third piece of evidence. All right. So let's get to our third piece of evidence. Can morality and governance coexist? And I have an article from Grand Canyon University called Exploring Political Morality. So I think this one is kind of going to cover both aspects of previous two pieces of evidence went over. So without further ado, let's get into it. Um, So it says the intersection of politics and morality is an intense topic of deliberation and contemplation, particularly in the Western world, which is forced to grapple with a growing number of fashionable social issues arising to the front of political discourse. These new topics, one by one, supplant subjects which have yet to be resolved in the public sphere despite decades of debate. As society continuously attempts to confront this array of complex issues, the question of political morality and the resolution of said subject looms large in the minds of all who grapple with it. While this enthralling realm of political ethics requires an examination akin to that of what is found in the medical field, here we will attempt to simply skim the surface, carefully attempted to provide some context to this complex intersection. Before we dive deeper into political morality, let's quickly set the stage on which we will dance. So the intersection of politics and morality, an inseparable duo. It is impossible to separate politics and morality entirely, and it fools errands to try. The decisions made by policymakers are bound by an invisible thread of morality built in by their creator, whether they choose to acknowledge this ethereal connection or not. Therefore, it is eminent importance in representative democracies that morality lives at the forefront of a state's decision-making process, given the gravity that the choices made can have profound effects on the lives of individuals within society as a whole. It is therefore both natural and imperative that ethical consideration play a pivotal role in governance, made paramount by leaders willing to accept political morality and stand before a populace in objection to society's unethical mores. Now, I would say that politics has over the years created a dirty stain on itself, because of what people will do to get elected, the fact that people have paid for elections, the fact that people will do just about anything in order to get that power, and so that's why we question is morality in politics, right? um and that's outside of the laws that are actually being created in order to make sure that our country is governed in a just manner. So it's the practices that happen, because it's even in business practices as well, right? It's even in Hollywood. So it's a lot of different institutions we question the morality, right? Because I always question it because I'm like, if this country is so Christian, if most people, which 8 out of 10 people, probably 9 out of 10 people, believe in a higher power, then why is there so much corruption and immoral behavior that goes on? I mean, we have to ask the question, right? It's no different in politics, right? We got to ask that question. So it said 4 common ethical issues for political candidates. One, the utilitarian dilemma. Um, Hold on. We are a fallen people, so placing one's self-interest before the benefit of the group is deep within our very nature. The pressure put on politicians to make decisions the best direct society are tantamount to the choices made by the Sunday pastor as he wrestled with how best to guide his flock along the straightest path to heaven. One of the fundamental ethical issues in politics that being and forever shall revolve around the concept of utilitarianism and whether or not a politician should prioritize the contentment of the majority, even if it means sacrificing the interests of a minority. In most cases, the search for this position that strikes the proper balance between the welfare of the majority and the protection of the right of the few is a politician uneasy and challenging. It shouldn't be uneasy. We have to protect the majority over the minority. It just makes sense, right? So it shouldn't. This I don't think should be an easy decision. That is, unless they are not willing to risk the immediate selfish desire for perpetual political position and the power prestige that inevitably comes along. In these cases, one could argue that their situation is not to necessarily do what is best, but instead bow to the will of the majority, regardless of emotionality that may blind the masses from the truth, maintaining politics, electability, and authority. And you know that happens, right? They'll do what would get them elected versus what may be right. That happens, right? Transparency and accountability. A cornerstone of political ethics is transparency, a mantra most every executive and legislator espouses when both entering office and using to levy criticism upon the outgoing administration. Openness in the political process and holding elected leaders accountable for their actions is essential for morally sound political system. That accountability was supposed to be most frequently found in the election process itself, with the occasional power to recall those who egregiously usurped their authority prior to an election opportunity. However, it has become much more murky in the ever-growing number of non-competitive states and districts in which the pattern of tribal mentality through party line voting prevent the worst offenders from ever facing a truly competitive environment. Now, this is one thing I don't think there's, in general, I don't think there's much accountability, right? Definitely in politics. So I definitely, when it comes to morality and politics, as far as holding people accountable, well, let me say this. We're willing to hold people accountable politically, but it's not always fair, right? So we'll blame a president, a sitting president, for something that the previous president did, or for something that Congress may have done, or so it's the accountability is not fair to go around. Corruption and ethical lapses. To that end, corruption is a never-ending ethical quagmire in politics in which the participants are only become more sinister over time. The misuse of power through bribery and graft erode the trust between citizens and their government, undermining the moral foundation of society. The general overall lack of transparency and accountability, unfortunately, make truly condemning and punishing the worst offenders particularly difficult, especially in those situations in which one party rule prevents a competitive environment, thus destroying the opportunity for political culpability from ever being applied. Corruption has existed in politics for a very long time, and unfortunately, it's not going anywhere. It's no different in business, no different in religion, and everywhere, right? Because at the end of the day, we got to remember we're human beings. So, human rights, particularly in America, in which our founding documents clearly note the imperative nature of such protections by the government, upholding human rights is the most paramount of moral obligation grappled with in politics. The violation of human rights, whether domestically or internationally, raises grave ethical concerns that demand to be confronted. However, when politics, and in particular the rights of minorities, come into contact, politics nearly always win. It is a very special group of politicians willing to risk their position to fly in the face of potentially overwhelming or certainly exceptionally vocal backlash in order to place the demands of the ethical concern first and foremost before the desire of the majority of the populace. Now, human being rights should be at the forefront, right? You would think. But we understand that that's not always the case. Power, control, economics, those kind of may usurp human rights at times. And that's why, as the article states, we politically find ourselves in very murky waters because you have a lot of people that's involved in governance. All right. So the intentionality of people is of utmost importance. And that's all I want to read. But I thought the 4 points that they actually made was 4 good points of how politics is supposed to kind of enforce morality. Now, does it happen most of the time? Probably not. Does it happen in a good normative state? Who knows? So those who truly understand politics in terms of being in those political rooms, in those spaces where things are being discussed, truly only knows. So can morality and governance coexist? To be continued. All right, I got one more piece of evidence for you, and then we're gonna wrap up today's episode.
Well, I think morality is subjective, but you think it's subjective too because it comes from God.
That's interesting.
Wait, does it come from God or independent of God?
Of course, it comes from God. It's transcendent.
That's subjective. That's subjective. Yes, it is. No. If it comes from God, it's specifically subjective. If it comes independent of God, then it's objective. No, what you just told me is also compatible morality with moral anti-realism.
Go back to the 10 Commandments.
You don't understand metaethics.
Well, hold on a second.
What does subjective morality mean? What does it mean?
Subjective morality means that it comes in everybody's own opinion, their own form,
not dependent upon a stance. Again, God is a stance, and that's the truth of morality.
If let's believe, do you believe if everybody believed in the concept of God, the transcendent God, that there was a 10 commandments and we should live by them, right? Is that objective morality?
No. Just because people agree doesn't make it objective. Okay. Absolutely. Every word you just used was created by other human beings that are engaging in conversation.
No, no.
All right. So that was my fourth piece of evidence. You know, I always like to leave you guys with a video. And I thought that video was very interesting because, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of people like to connect morality with their religion and with God, right? Even though I think religion and morality is separate, particularly for those who are not believers, atheists, agnostic, whatever, right? More spiritual. So morality is going to exist even if there was a God or not. Depends on what you believe in, right? But their whole conversations was talking about God and subjectivity and objectivity, right? So when we are talking about politics, that end lies the issue for those people who are trying to think of it from purely a subjective stance and those who are thinking from a more objective stance. So therein lies our issues when it comes to morality and governance. So that's just another little caveat to throw in the conversation of can morality and governance exist. I think it's a very slippery slope. I think it waxes and wanes. I think there are some people that would say they're doing God's work and look at morality in terms of their religion. And I think there are other people who are just looking at trying to do something to benefit as many people as possible. And I think there are other people who are looking to gain wealth and power and prestige and to leave a legacy. All right. It all exists in the same realm and it's no different in politics, just like it's no different in any other institution, in any other situation. All right. So we're going to leave today's episode with that. And with that, I say thank you to all my supporters, all my subscribers. Most of you are not subscribed, man. Go ahead and subscribe, man. Like the video, share the video, make sure, help a brother out. All right. Hey, you already know. Links will be in the skip. Go get this book right here. All right. That's my latest book. Go check out the other videos. We got some other great episodes for you. And of course, we're excited about the new year. Links will be in the description, social media handles, all that. You already know. And as always, I'm you, you are me, love always, love eternal. Remember, the worst thing you could do is lie to yourself. And I believe we made that case, baby. All right. Deuces. One love.